Greetings, I'm the political ferret. Let's talk politics. First things first. I worshipped Marx, really I did, being a young lefty back in the 90s, and even something you would call a social justice warrior nowadays. I do not anymore, and I want to give you an idea why this changed. There is this notion that left means always Marxist socialism, and that's just simply not true. There was a left before Marx wrote his books. The most basic difference is that the left wants to go forward, wants to push limits, wants to go where nobody has gone before, try new stuff, and so on. The right, on the other hand, tends to dream of lost achievements, of these good old times where everything was better, simpler, and greater. Call them whatever you like, right or left, neophiles and neophobes, the basic idea is the same. None of that is good and none of that is bad. Sometimes you have to go back, sometimes you have to go forth. There's never a guarantee to stand on the right side of history. The thing is, new stuff of yesterday is the old stuff of tomorrow. Let me illustrate this. Think back some 100 years. There were no nations back then. There were no fixed borders. There were areas of influence, and these areas called themselves kingdoms, empires, republics, tribes, whatever. In a nutshell, it worked like this. Someone had an infrastructure of gaining and maintaining power. If this guy, and usually it was a guy, had 5 men with swords and conquered a village, he became king of that village, till somebody came with more men and subjugated him. And so on, and so on. The resulting feudal system was basically a system of subjugated subjugators, and it was always in the flow. If the old king died, his sons, daughters, nephews, aunts, and generals did start to engage in bigger army diplomacy, and those who won took whatever they could. The identity or cohesion of the people were never an argument. I like the example of the Saxons, and that's just a very, very, very rough overview. The people of the Saxons lived in the north of a place we know today as Germany. But today, this is Saxon. Why? Well, in the Middle Ages, the Saxons in the north got hold of quite some land in the south. We are talking about 10th century. There was some splitting up going on, and eventually they just lost the control over the north. So what to do? Well, the big boss was still called Duke of Saxons, so the people in the south were now called Saxons. And the place where Saxon was in the 10th century is now known as Schleswig-Holstein. Well, give or take some 100 square kilometers. But the point is, the background of the inhabitants were no big deal. It was quite normal that the king didn't speak the language of his subjects, and it was quite normal that his subjects spoke different languages in the same kingdom. Nobody cared. What was important was that the farmer paid his taxes, so that the big boss, whatever he called himself, had enough money and power to engage in bigger army diplomacy to get even more power. There was this strange idea that there is an alternative to that, an idea that the borders should be dictated based on the inhabitants, same culture, same language. Well, it was mostly language. These entities should then be called nations, and it would be a great utopia because borders were not defined by the armies of those rich guys that didn't care about the people at all, and the nations could live in peace with each other, next to each other, and all by themselves. Well, today we know how that worked out, but back in the day, the right-wingers said, nah, let's stay with monarchy. It's not perfect, but it works. And the nationalists were the leftists who said, let's try this new idea. It will be wonderful. It will be a utopia. Everybody will love it. As we know, the idea of nations got grip and became the dominant system. Now, the nationalists became this old bearded man who told everyone, let's stay that way, it's not perfect, but it works. Oh, I already hear the people saying, the ferret says that nationalists are left, he has no idea whatsoever. And no, that's not true. The nationalists back in, say, 1750 were lefties, but that's some time ago. It's just a good example, in my opinion, how the new way becomes the old way, given enough time and, that's important, success. So let's take a look to socialism. There is this notion that socialism is a new idea, and again, well, it isn't. Take it that way. Every 3-year-old understands that if he is able to take something from another kid, he has more than this kid. And having more is somehow better than having less. So, well, materialism is something every 3-year-old could come up with. On the other hand, the idea that if everybody gives what he can give and takes only what he needs, this should be utopia. I mean, it's not hard to imagine. It's something that every teenager invents at some point because, well, it's not complicated. So, in old times, someone came up with this idea. And because it did make quite some sense at first, people tried this over and over and over again. The thing is, it always did fail. If we are talking about a community of more than 100 to 150 people or so, that has to do with number, and we'll go to that in a later video. Below that number, it can work, but such small communities run into different problems. However, let's change the point of view a bit. I would say it would be fair to call the Communist Party in Tsar Russia left-wing. Of course. Perhaps in the 1920s too. But in the 1980s? In the 1980s, they behaved like right-wingers. They told the people, nah, let's stay with communism. It's not perfect, but it works. Well, I guess this is one of these points where left-wingers and right-wingers can agree to disagree, and I'm really looking forward to the discussion in the comment section. But again, the true left is all about new stuff, of stuff different that is from things, of how things are right now, that basically defines left. The thing is that socialism sounds really nice. I mean, it really does. And because it never became the unchallenged established system, because it was never stable. Like the idea of nations, for instance, it never made this transition from being understood as left-wing, going right-wing. Even if it is obvious, if you take a look to the Soviet Union in the 1980s or North Korea or China right now. If people are in power, they tend to consolidate this power, trench themselves, and suppress every movement that wants real change. The left is a movement fueled by dreams. And there are much more visions than socialism. The ones who think they own the political brand left are not really interested in change. Their goal is power. Their goal is to behave like right-wingers entrenched in safe spaces, with power over people and a system that never would ever be allowed to be altered. But the left is fluid, it's uncontrollable, and it's unhomogeneous. That makes it so sexy, especially for the young. The left is a big creativity space. It's not something somebody can own. Whenever something came from the left and had success, it wasn't left anymore. But as long as an idea has a purpose, nobody cares. I mean, nobody asks if a concept that works is right or left. Useful things just don't need that. Thanks for listening.